I'm of the view that humans are a social species. We like to connect, most of us like to connect with other human beings.
Welcome to the Coaching Revealed podcast series. In this episode of Coaching Revealed, Institute of Coaching Executive Director Jeff Hull interviews Jonathan Passmore about the intersection of AI and coaching. Jonathan discusses how his natural curiosity and background in both academia and coaching led him to explore AI's potential, particularly through generative AI models. While Jonathan acknowledges the impressive capabilities of AI, he also emphasizes its limitations, such as the lack of emotional nuance and empathy, key areas where human coaches still excel. The conversation explores the potential disruption AI could bring to the coaching industry. Jonathan argues that AI tools may augment coaching rather than replace it, helping coaches be more efficient and scalable while still retaining their human connection with clients. He conceptualizes a hybrid coaching model where AI supports human coaches with tasks like habit tracking and progress monitoring, allowing coaches to focus on deeper transformational work with their clients. As they discuss AI's role in coaching, Jonathan and Jeff discuss crucial ethical concerns, especially surrounding data privacy and transparency. Jonathan stresses the importance of maintaining ethical standards as AI tools become more integrated into the coaching process. Finally, Jonathan reflects on the evolving identity of a coach in the face of AI, urging coaches to embrace new tools and evolve alongside technology to stay aware in a rapidly changing field. Thanks for tuning in to Coaching Revealed. Let's get started.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Coaching Revealed, the podcast from the Institute of Coaching. My name is Jeffrey Hull. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Coaching, and I am really excited to be here to continue our series on the impact of technology and artificial intelligence on the coaching profession. And I have with me here one of our thought leaders in that space, Professor Jonathan Passmore, who those of you in the coaching world that are listening, many of you will know Jonathan. He is a dear friend of the Institute of Coaching and someone who is very well versed in the whole spectrum, I think it's safe to say, of the landscape of professional coaching. I wanted to be sure to interview him because he's recently put out some new research, some new thought-provoking material around artificial intelligence and coaching. You want to check that out on LinkedIn because he posts regularly his articles, his research. Jonathan takes a relatively neutral or even maybe positive stance toward the impact of technology and is clearly committed to educating all of us, as I am and as we are here at the Institute of Coaching, around how to work effectively with new technologies, how to become comfortable where it can add value, and to become aware of the challenges and constraints and concerns. So I'm excited to have Jonathan with me here today. Now, for those of you who may not know Jonathan, which probably isn't going to be too many of you, I want to just give you a quick background. He is an award-winning and internationally respected chartered psychologist based in the UK and written over 40 books, including The Coach's Handbook, which is kind of a Bible, I think, safe to say, for many of us in the coaching world. He also has written a book called Becoming a Coach, The Essential ICF Guide and Coaching Tools, volumes 1, 2, and 3, and over 250 book chapters and scientific articles. He holds 5 degrees, so I'm not going to list them all. He's the professor of coaching and behavioral change at the Henley Business School and senior vice president at Ezra. And probably most importantly, he has a new book out that I have been privileged to not only read, but also discuss with him and his co-editors, The Health and Well-Being Coach's Handbook, a practitioner's guide for clinicians, coaches, and health professionals, which is really an amazing compendium of the latest research in all the different areas that coaches might be called upon to work with clients around health and well-being. And that pretty much, I would say in today's world, means all of our clients. because that is what we are focused on for a world of thriving. So with that, I want to welcome you, Jonathan. I know we can talk to so many different topics, but today we're going to focus on your recent work around artificial intelligence and technology.
It's great to join you today, Jeff, and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to make sure that you were part of this podcast series for the Institute of Coaching. I've read some of your recent articles that you've published around the topic, and I know you're really very well versed on some of the current research. But the other reason is I just really wanted to honor the fact that you were the very first coach on stage to interact live with a coach bot in front of 500 people. And I was in the room, and this was in India, where we were both giving talks and to the ICF coaching conference. And I have to say that it was on that day that I realized this is someone who has a very special ability to hold an audience around some topics that are controversial. Because even then, a year or 2 years ago, you were talking to ChatGPT, and it has evolved quite a lot since then. So I know you're going to tell us what your latest interactions are with our friend ChatGPT and all of his brothers and sisters in the coaching space. So anyway, by way of background, I'm excited to have you here. Let's start with a little, we call our podcast Coaching Revealed. And I think that we do that because we do like to get a little bit of the backstory from our interviewees around how they became interested and passionate around some of these topics. So give us a little background. How did Jonathan Passmore become an AI provocateur?
Oh, I like that phrase, provocateur. I guess I start with all of the writing and research and thinking in the coaching space because I'm curious. I'm curious particularly about new things that are emerging, but I'm curious about old things and debates that have been floating around for a long while. And I've been involved in the coaching industry for probably 25, 27 or so years, doing a course back in the 1990s, working in consulting and then in the university sector, and have moved between those two sectors really of consulting and academia. And during that time, I've engaged with competencies, with ethics, with different coaching models, with evaluation and impact of coaching cultures. And so in some respects, this is a sort of continuation of building out the work that we are doing in coaching to help all of us as coaches in the work that we do with clients to simply get better in service of our clients. So when AI and digital started to be talked about, digital really in the 2010s, we started off with Skype, many of us, and I did some research looking at the usage of that, and I've done a range of studies around digital AI. It just seemed an extension of that technology coming together with coaching research. And the first study that I did was really connected to the emergence of ChatGPT 3.5. It was launched, some of people may remember, just before Christmas. And so I was at home over that Christmas period and thought, hey, this would be interesting. Let me test it through a number of hypotheses. So we developed a number of hypotheses and tested how effective ChatGPT was in undertaking a number of tasks. And one of those tasks that we asked it to do was to produce various outputs, evaluating the ICF coaching competencies. I think we asked it to look at the ethics aspect of the ICF, or we asked it to produce some articles, which we then shared with professors and academics in the coaching sphere. And what we found in that very early period was that ChatGPT had no problem in producing content. The challenge, when one delved beneath the surface, if you really were an expert and you took your time, there were lots of errors amongst it. So just as one example of this, while we produced the articles that were, essays on coaching, and we pretended these were students, we send them to academics in the field based in universities, asked them to mark that. None of them spotted the errors that they contained. In fact, one of those errors was relating to a paper that it suggested I had produced with people, interestingly, that I had written with before on a topic that I had written on and in a journal I'd published. When I saw it, I thought, I'm pretty sure that's not me. And as you were saying, Jeff, I've published quite a lot over the last 25 years. I'm pretty sure that's not me. So I had to go to the journal, check that volume and issue number, and it was correct. ChatGPT had got the volume and issue correct for the year. I looked at that page number, and of course, it had just made it up. So its ability to hallucinate, one might even use the word lie or deceive, was incredible, and deceive in a way that was very believable and convinced other academics who were specialists in the coaching sphere. So this was saying to me, wow, this is a very powerful tool. If we could improve the accuracy of this, then this becomes a really useful tool for us. And even before we managed to publish, 3.5 disappeared and 4 emerged. So we had to rerun the results. They were slightly better the second time, and we published that paper, David T. and myself. Then I started to get curious around ethics and some of the privacy issues. And David and I published a paper on that. And more recently, I've started to wonder about how effective AI could be as a coach. Is it something that is going to challenge, replace, or sit alongside us as human coaches? And there is much debate around this. There are those people who might be classified as a sort of doomers, will shake their head and say, no, never, no, you can't replace a human. A human is just unreplaceable, like a horse on a horse and cart. You know, you can't ever replace the horse with a mechanical horse. There are other people at the other end of the spectrum, and I don't count myself as being one of these, who see the huge potential of AI. And we might classify those as Zoomers, the people who are like, wow, just imagine if it's like this now, what is it going to be in 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 years' time? And while I share that view, it probably will have a significant impact on the world of work and the world of leisure in the way that the internet has. How it will unfold, what it will be good at, I am less clear about. There's a fabulous paper that is currently on review called The Jagged Edge of AI, and talks about how uncertain we are when we give it particular tasks about how well it will perform those tasks. And that's very much my experience. Different AI tools perform in different ways, and they perform different tasks with different levels of capability. And I probably sit somewhere in the middle, that I am hugely optimistic, but at the same time, I am hugely skeptical and feel that there are aspects of AI that we need to carefully manage and be discerning in how we apply it to specific tasks, and put in place the guardrails, ethics, privacy, for example, to manage the human data, the human experience, and ensure that as this technology increases in its power in the world of work and the world of home, that AI remains the servant of humanity and does not become its master.
Obviously, that's the crucial juncture of where are we headed and where do people think that looks, what do people think that looks like, right? I'm curious to step back for a minute and think about coaching as a modality. And I'd love to get your thoughts on how it has evolved within the AI space. You know, it's basically giving you the answers, advisors, asking any question and being able to come up with the answer. And that's not coaching. And so I'm curious where you think, or even if you think, the AI capability has crossed that chasm from information synthesis into the space of questions and reflection and deepening the trajectory that of the path that a coach would take. You know, have we crossed that Rubicon yet, or are we on the way? Where are we in that?
So let me take us back to maybe 2020 and my experience with script-based AI tools. Some of your guests, Nikki, for example, when he comes on, will no doubt be talking about the early work that he was doing with script-based AI tools, which were already demonstrating an ability to support individuals in goal attainment. And he published a paper, I think it was 2022, on a script-based coach. Nikki, no doubt, will acknowledge that there were some methodological challenges with this. Student sample, so that becomes a bit of an issue. Can we generalize from students to a wider population? But more fundamentally, when the research was done, we in the UK, it was a UK sample of students, were in lockdown. So maybe we might rate an AI coach more highly because we can't leave the front door, can't get outside, can't talk to real people than we might do in normal times. And there have been other studies that have been done with AI script-based tools, which show similar sorts of outcomes with students, that they have some value. Then we had the emergence of ChatGPT, and as you say, Jeff, that we've seen Grok 3 and a whole host of others emerging as generative AI tools. And much of the challenges that those who are working with those tools have experienced is to try to get them to focus on asking open questions, to hold a silence, and give thinking space and time the opportunity for people to reflect on generating their own answers. AI has been notoriously difficult in managing its own desire to give an answer to a question. Pose a question and it will produce an outcome. And we've certainly seen a number of tools that are emerged in the last 18 months or so onto the market that have gained some traction, that describe themselves as coaches, that are really answer bots. And as I've illustrated earlier in our conversation, there are some challenges, I think, with the answers that are being generated from these tools. Okay. Certainly the quality of answers continues to improve, but it is still unreliable. There are certainly issues around how data is managed if you're sharing data with that. And there are some tools, for example, Copilot, that creates a boundary that enables you to share information within your organization, ensure that it doesn't go back into a large language model and be shared with the wider global community who are accessing the tool. There are problems with bias. So more recently, in the last 6 to 9 months, I've carried out a couple of studies that are interesting maybe to share here to try and evaluate the impact and the potential of the tools as we move forward as generative AI tools. And I was working with another of your guests who is on this podcast series using their AI tool. And we first of all gathered data, assessed that data against the ICF competencies, imagining that the recording and the transcript was a submission for an ICF application. And we had ICF master coaches who were trained assessors to evaluate the outputs. Now, usually most coaches would probably send in 1 or 2, depending on whether they're an ACC or a PCC. And here we produced around about 20 pieces of output and asked them as an assessor or group of assessors to then assess these. And what we broadly found was that in the main, the outputs were at an ACC level. So the ICF, if it was been assessing this AI coach bot, it would have granted it an ACC. There was examples of PCC evidence. So it was able to demonstrate specific behaviors within the bars and markers for the PCC standard, but it wasn't comprehensive. And it certainly wasn't at an MCC level. So what we're seeing is a basic coaching competence that would encourage some forms of reflection and was certainly goal-directed with the opportunity for people to develop a self-awareness, insight, develop a plan that they potentially could take away, following a model, a framework. The second one that we carried out was then we asked managers to engage with the AI tool, and we asked them to evaluate it against a series of criteria. We asked them to evaluate it against the insights that they've got, confidentiality, goal attainment, series of criteria. We compared the scores of those managers with a second group of managers. Wasn't a random control trial, but it was groups of managers in these 2 categories. Some had a human coach, some had this AI coach, and then we scored them against these different metrics. It was as if AI was Marmite. There were a small proportion of people who loved the AI, about 10%. So Marmite is a spread that we have in the UK. But there are people who I know who just love it. They'll have it on their toast. They'll have it on bread. Love it. They'll put it into cooking. So it's a spread, but people generally are not ambivalent about it. They'll go, yeah, it was all right. They go, I hate it or I love it. And it was the same with this. We saw this distribution. About 10% of people quite loved engaging with the AI tool, but 90% of them, and it was the converse with humans. So human scores were across the piece higher at the present moment when they were engaging with this bot, but a few people, a small percentage of them, around 10%, really loved it. Now, we then asked the next question. We haven't done this research, so that is a direct comparison. But what happens when it's 2 a.m. in the morning? Of course, we know that accessibility for a machine is going to be instant. For a human coach, I might need to book a day or 3 or a week or several weeks in advance to be able to get into that coach's diary.
Right.
So there's the accessibility issue that AI offers. The second one that I think is going to be a real benefit, which is back to my point that I started with about the horse and the cart. AI is not going to be another horse. It's a car. So it's going to reduce the cost and increase the convenience for individuals. So I think that we are not going to lose access to human coaches. I think human coaches will still be there. But probably we're beginning to reach a stage in our developed world, organizational coaching, where we're reaching peak coach. We've got enough coaches in the world for the people who can afford them, unless the price continues to drop significantly from where we are now, in which case there'll be fewer coaches. But probably we're reaching that stage where many organizations are using coaching, and maybe there's another 20% or a 50%, maybe there's even 100% gain. But we're seeing broadly, we're reaching that point where people can afford it, are buying it. People who can't afford it can't access that. What an AI coach potentially could do is move coaching from the maybe 250,000 people a year who access coaching in any year to 2 billion people.
And especially earlier in their careers, right?
And people who are in the developing world. So somebody who might be a shopkeeper in South Sudan, they have a smartphone. Wouldn't it be great to have a coaching conversation? If that costs them $3 a month, not 300 or 3,000 bucks a month, then that individual might be accessing the coach. So what we're doing is we're broadening this out. I don't think that we're there yet. And there are people who, if you had the choice, would choose a human coach like I would choose a made-to-measure suit. But I still buy my suits from the Marks and Spencers or from a high street store because it's convenient and it's at a price point that I can afford. And this is where AI technology comes in. Maybe never as good as a human coach, a really skilled, transformational human coach, but good enough in a year or 2 or 3 to help the South Sudan shopkeeper in planning how they develop their store, or helping me at 2 a.m. in the morning when I can't contact my human coach, even though I might be a senior manager, but I've still got this problem whirring in my head and I can't get to sleep. The AI can help me there. So that's how I see that technology potentially will grow the overall coaching market as a supplement where we have access to this, convenience and cost.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it begs one specific question, and I have my point of view on this, so I'm curious yours. I think you and I are both involved in advising and supporting the evolution of a couple of different firms that are developing these AI coaching tools. One that I've been helping is called the Sherlock Super Coach. And I think there's one that you're involved with Ezra.
Ezra, we have Kai, and this is a tool that we use to supplement the human coach. So we have a number of human coaching sessions, and it is almost like the intermediate between coaching sessions that the AI tool comes in to encourage you to reflect on the actions you're taking away and the learning that you're taking there.
Yeah, you're kind of already answering my question. So I'm still curious to be specific, because I think some of these companies are, they're talking about the democratization of coaching and the reaching much greater access, as you were earlier describing, where a company could potentially give coaching driven through AI to hundreds of their employees earlier in their career. Does that lend itself to them eventually wanting to work with a human being, or does it lend them to ultimately recognizing or feeling, not recognizing, but feeling that their AI coach is so good and will continue to get better that they won't ever need a human coach? Like, which direction will it take us?
So I'm of the view that humans are a social species. We like to connect, most of us like to connect with other human beings. We are energized and engaged by and fascinated by fellow human beings. And so while technology no doubt will improve over the next year or 3 or 5, If I can afford it and it's convenient to me, I will choose to have the conversation with Jeff, the real human being. If it's 2 a.m. and you're not available, if I can't afford you because your rate to pay your mortgage and pay all of your other costs. So it isn't about coaches continually reducing their price. If I can only afford $3 for a conversation or $3 a month to have these conversations, then I'm going to go for the AI tool when it's convenient and when there's cost, assuming that we can put in place those safeguards that I was referring to earlier. Because one of the issues that we still see with AI tools is their US bias. So it's scraping data off the internet, it's scraping more data that's in US English. So the answers I get are US spelling. So as a Brit, I'm always thinking, hey, this AI tool can't spell, doesn't adapt it for me. But if I'm in Saudi Arabia and I'm a Muslim, then the amount of data it's going to scrape off relating to my faith, how I see the world, my principles and my values is probably less than it's already scraped off US sites. Right. So there's this issue about a white, Western, US orientation, and we need to get these tools over time to become more sophisticated, to understand our unique needs, our own cultural perspective, our set of values. And I'm sure as those tools develop, that will happen. As we write an answer, the answers that we write are pretty brief. We've seen this in our early research at Ezra. So people, if they're just engaging on a text-to-text conversation, they're going to think less deeply. They're going to spend less time in providing an answer. But when we speak, we tend to speak more fully. We're thinking as we're speaking and developing a more sophisticated response. So voice-to-voice is the direction of travel. Deep the conversation, not for everyone. Giving people a choice, I think, is always important. But for most of us, having voice-to-voice. And then the other aspect, which I think helps us in managing the conversation, is to provide an opportunity for feeling as if we're engaging with another human being. So I can look at somebody else's face. I can see their reaction.
Yeah, so what you're pointing to, and it's not 10 years away, it's probably 5 years away, is a highly sophisticated image of an avatar that speaks in a culturally appropriate and well-honed, sophisticated language with the user within whatever country. So, you know, this issue of bias, US bias, Western bias has been around even in live coaching for 2 decades, right? I mean, people still say there are too many white coaches from the US, you know, and they're still focused on the Western cultural lexicon, and there's still a lot of unconscious bias. So that's still there, even in the human space. You know, we've made strides to globalize, to recognize, to honor, to be more diverse, and it seems like it's 2 steps forward and 2 steps backwards at times, depending upon who you're talking to and who's in charge of whatever organizational dynamic or culture. But I think, to your point around the timing, many of these challenges that you're pointing out will be addressed.
Ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started.
And it will happen quickly. I mean, because things have not taken 10 years. I mean, 2 years ago, I saw you interact, and now it's so much more sophisticated, like 100%, 200%, 300%. It's happening really fast. I understand that you and I are probably both still in the optimistic spectrum or the optimistic zone, but I want to hear what you think about, you've mentioned the ethics and the confidentiality issues, but I also want to spend some time having you reflect back to us, where is the challenge for those coaches who want to stay vital and viable as human coaches 5 years from now? I know we have a tendency, in a platitudinous way to say, oh, stay up to date with the technology, get facile with it, pay attention, read Jonathan Passmore's articles, look at Nikki Terblanche. By the way, it's Nikki Terblanche, for those of you who are hearing the name Nikki. He's at Stellenbosch University, I think, in South Africa, doing incredible research, and will be on this podcast. But I do want to hear us address, before I let you go, the fear that also exists. What does the future look like for coaches 3 to 5 years from now?
So just as there are people who are making made-to-measure suits, there will be people who are having made-to-measure conversations, human to human. Demand for that made-to-measure tailor, demand for that made-to-measure coach. So humans love that coaching, but it comes at a cost. And the cost certainly has been pretty flat for the last 20 years. Prices on average have been falling. But if you're coaching C-suite leaders, senior executives in organizations, the fee rates still are reasonably high. I see that work continuing into the future. People will want to have space where they can have a sounding board, space where they have an independent perspective and challenge, a space to think. And that is really valuable for senior executives. So I see that continuing. It's survived digital coaching and it will survive AI. I do think, as I was saying earlier, that in the bulk of the market, prices, as the volume of coaching continues to increase, prices are still probably going to be coming down, the rates that individual coaches can charge, as the number of coaches increases. As supply goes up, unless demand is going up in a similar way, prices, the fee rates are going to continue to come down. But I think we're beginning to reach a point where we probably have enough coaches in the world, enough human coaches. There are many people who are filling their days with coaching, but there are many coaches who I know who would still love more coaching work. So I think what coaches need to do to survive and thrive over the coming decade is certainly to get better at engaging with technology. How can they use AI technologies to help them run their coaching practices? So it's not just AI as a tool to deliver coaching. It could be an administrative AI. It could be using Copilot on Microsoft, for example, to manage their diary, send emails, summarize meetings. All of this can be helpful in taking some of the burden of the administrative task and maybe replacing or supplementing the virtual assistants that people have as human assistants. We can turn some of those tasks into AI. I think the other thing that human coaches need to do is get better at using technology. Back in the early 2000s, many of us would use tools in our coaching conversations. We might use strengths cards. We might use other tools to facilitate the client, constellations, for example, to have a new insight about the challenges, the system, the team themselves. And I've noticed that in digital spaces, the use of those tools has diminished. And I think that's partly because we are focused on just simply connecting and having the conversation, where I would encourage us to master more of that conversation, to think about curating our backgrounds, think more carefully about how we're optimizing the use of technology and complementing it with tools to help our clients get the very best from coaching conversations. And I've yet to see coaching programs really adapt to this new coaching environment. And then last of all, I think coaches need to diversify. Yes, of course, one-to-one conversations. Personally, I find an intense value and pleasure and privilege in meeting people one-to-one. But I think that there is much opportunity in team coaching, where AI would find it much more difficult to step into the team coaching space. I also think that group coaching is an emerging intervention. And again, people stepping into that space, getting training, developing their skills there will be a further way to add to the work that they're doing. So they might do a mix of executive, they might do a mix of on a digital coaching platform like Ezra Coaching, they might do some teamwork themselves, some group coaching work themselves. And by having that blend, able to then have a reasonable living, and that variety offers them stimulation and satisfaction from a job that they can enjoy and engage with.
Yeah, no, I think it's very well said. I think that diversifying, there was a time, a decade ago, when I would go to an ICF meeting and the whole conversation was all around specializing, making sure that you had one niche and that you were the go-to coach for this particular thing, whether it was like losing weight or whatever. I mean, it could be any niche that, or a niche within an industry or a niche within a profession, right? And there was a time as the profession was sort of evolving and growing and maturing where that made a lot of sense. It created a lot of silos. And I think your point is a good one, that we're at almost an inflection point in the other direction. You now do have to have some level of grounding and support and foundation and an expertise, but broaden out, deep but broad, to look at as you said, groups and teams and different kinds of ways of interacting with a coaching mindset or a coaching skill set. So I think that's really well articulated. I'd love to have you reflect as we wrap around two more themes that we haven't delved into too much. One you've brought up a couple times, and I know you're very well versed in this space, which is around ethics, confidentiality, the ethical implications. I know you work closely with the Coaching Ethics Forum that Wendy Ann Smith founded, David Clutterbuck, those folks. So ethics is something that you're very well versed in. You've done research and published in that. So I'd love to hear you comment on where you see the current state of the ethical conversation, which looks at, who owns the data, who has access to it, all of those kinds of things. And then finally, to reflect on, is AI changing what it means to be a definition of coaching even is? Yeah, that one's coming up a lot in my conversations with other senior folks. So let's hold that one aside for a second. So just to give you a preview of the final questions, but share a little bit on your current thinking around the ethical implication.
Yeah. So what you've offered me here to end with is like putting my two hands into two bowls of sick. Like, oh dear, tricky topics to get our fingers around.
Yeah.
Ethics. So let's start with that bowl of sick. So what we're uncertain about, where did this model gather its data? We're uncertain about where is the data that we share with it being held? Who will have access to it?
Right.
Again, the lack of transparency causes me considerable anxiety. And while I've painted a picture, for example, of human avatars, as or if we progress in that direction, I think it's critical that users understand who they're engaging with, where the data comes from that's been used to train this tool, what data is being harvested from the conversation, where it's stored, and how it may be used in the future. And a choice to opt out of any of those things. No, I don't want my conversation to be held, either for me in the future, or I don't want it to be held to be shared with others. And there are times when I don't mind if my data that I'm sharing in the conversation is provided to the wider world. Sometimes I might be very relaxed about that. There might be other times when I just want the conversation be between me and the bot, and other times between me and the bot to forget that conversation. I don't want you to refer to it again. I don't want to be re-traumatized by that issue that I've raised with you. Just forget it. You had those conversations with your friend in the cafe or in the pub, and you're like, just, do you know what? Okay, we've done that now. We're never going to go and talk about that again. So there are a host of issues around this. And I think at the moment, transparency and ethical standards are still emerging. I am not confident around the technology sector, and in the main, how the technology sector has managed its relationships with humans over the past 2 decades. So we can think of many technology providers. I don't need to mention them here, but listeners can think about the names that come to mind, who have acted in ways that I think subsequently we look back in the way that it is harvested data from us, stolen our data, or it's engaged with particularly teenagers, but also others of us on our social media feeds, for example, that has not added to the value of humanity, but has actually done us down, done us a disservice, done our children a disservice. So I am anxious about ethical standards and continue to talk about these issues, not in a sense with any hope, but a desperation, a desire to try and ensure that governments collectively act to set standards. I'm also extremely anxious around the emergence of rogue AI and how individual actors, bad actors in our society, or bad governments in our world may potentially start to use AI as a tool to attack our society, to undermine us. We can see that in terms of how AI could be potentially used in elections to elect a leader who might lead to divisions in society, who might withdraw from global institutions, might challenge their friends, and try and create relationships with states that are perceived to be enemies in the past, for example. Or we could see a time where you could target a health system or traffic lights or other types of power infrastructures through an AI attack, which rogue states in the future may want to do. And these multiple actions, like an election, can act to destabilize governments and societies. So I worry about this. We have a history of humanity, of creating opportunity, but we don't always so well manage the risk. And that requires government, but it also requires government to act not just in regulating the development of these technologies, but protecting us as citizens, creating safeguards for us and our societies.
So all of that said, let's go back to coaching as we wrap. Your breadth as a educator, as a researcher, and as a coach covers really a wide plethora of themes. As I said, your recent book was focused on health and well-being coaching. So it is appropriate, I think. What does it mean to be a coach? What is coaching going to be as things evolve with AI? Is it going to change? Is it going to be better defined, or is it going to become continuously diffused? I think that's the concern that I have.
So I'm very clear in my own mind what coaching is. And I go back to one of my first friends, colleagues, professional counterparts, Sir John Whitmore. And John wrote a book in the 1990s, Coaching for Performance. And John talks about the essence of coaching. For him, it was about developing individual personal responsibility and encouraging individuals to become more self-aware. And through that responsibility and self-awareness, to become more choiceful. And we best achieve those actions by a non-directive approach. So we are asking people questions, we're giving them the space to think for themselves, and we're not providing them with answers. When we start out in our learning journeys as 1, 2, 3-year-olds, we don't know any of the answers, and we need a directive approach. And that may be true when you're learning how to play tennis. Which end of the racket do I hold in this particular game? What do I do with the ball? What are the rules? But as you develop towards being an elite performer, and John trained in tennis or trained tennis players, was also a motor racing driver. As people develop towards elite performance, then it's about them, their strengths, how they choose to do it. And we get the Fosbury flop because someone broke the rules. We get Mozart, we get Picasso because they broke the rules, they did it their way. And for me, coaching is very much about helping people in that creative space to develop a deeper understanding about who they are, to develop more personal responsibility. The person who I can change the most is me, and then becoming more choiceful. So yes, the word might change its meaning, and there are many who are providers of AI tools who are saying, I've got a coaching tool, but it's really an instruction tool, and we need to wrestle very hard that word back. There's nothing wrong with an advice tool. It has some value.
Absolutely.
We need to hold the word coaching as precious because it has an important contribution to us as humanity. And I've often spoken, I think you and I, Jeff, have spoken about this, that coaching is something that we as humans have probably been doing for tens of thousands of years. It's part of the reason why it's us here, not the cockroaches and the dolphins, is what I like to say. And it's because of our ability to have language and to facilitate new thought, fresh insight, and to leverage our strengths to do things uniquely and differently and cope in dynamic environments. And if we do that, we preserve coaching as being something special. Yeah, we can have other tools doing other things, but let's be clear, coaching is a non-directive, facilitative conversation where we help people to become more choiceful.
Like Socrates. It goes back
Socrates.
2,000, 3,000 years, really. And it comes in different forms, different shapes, different modalities, as we've been talking about. But the fundamental, as you said, around creating a space for self-inquiry and self-exploration and finding one's own path with the support of an empathic listener is probably irreplaceable. I know the coaches that I have gained the most benefit from in my life will always hold a special place. On that note, thank you so much for taking the time. I know we covered a lot of territory and there's sort of endless amounts of research and perspectives and information that can be shared, but I think what you're adding into the mix is really incredibly valuable. And I just want to thank you from the Institute of Coaching and also from myself personally. I learned a lot from all the things you post and research that you do and the books that you publish. So keep on finding the time. I don't know how you do it, but keep on finding the time to continue to make that kind of contribution because we really appreciate it.
Lovely talking with you, Jeff.
And hopefully we will see you again very soon for whatever series we come up with next. If you're not a member of the Institute of Coaching, I hope you take a minute to look at our website, instituteofcoaching.org, because we also offer a number of seminars that are related to these themes. So stay tuned. We'll hear from you again soon. And thank you, Jonathan, for taking the time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaching Revealed, brought to you by the Institute of Coaching. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at instituteofcoaching.org. You can stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast by liking and following Coaching Revealed. You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X with the handle Institute of Coaching. We also love hearing from our guests, so please reach out to us with thoughts you have on this episode and any questions you have about coaching. Until next time, this is Emily Tarani with Coaching Revealed.